While the EU and allies are trying to reduce their dependence on Russian energy, others seem to be snapping it up.
This is a photo of the SCF Primorier tanker at the port of Marcus Hook, Pennsylvania. The ship used to frequent American and European ports. But recently, the 84,000-ton vessel has been spotted off the coast of India.
India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar has held talks with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov in Moscow.
Move to get the Russian oil is at a time when the global prices were moving upwards, and Russia gave us, not just us, many others, a discounted price.
They're going to keep buying. India, like other countries in Asia, even Japan and other countries, in local currency terms, they're seeing much higher oil prices than even the rest of us in dollar terms.
Hello everyone. I know most of you know India is importing near 90% of its oil requirement. For example, as per Reuters, in March 2023, India's oil demand was at 4.83 million barrels per day, out of which only 6 lakhs barrels per day of oil we produce locally in India, which is only 12%. So the remaining 88 to 90%, India is importing it from other countries. And as per IEA, International Energy Association, oil demand will increase near to 6 million barrels per day in 2025. Here, please note, India's demand is only going to increase, not the local oil production, since we got only that much oil reserve. In comparison, US imports around 40% of its requirement and China imports around 70% of their requirement. So here, as you can see, India is always having the problem with oil even on the normal good days. And over the past few decades, all the major geopolitical events usually led to sharp increase in the oil prices. For example, from March 2003 to March 2004, US entry of Iraq, which triggered a 49% jump in oil price. Then the Afghanistan crisis, 58% price up from September 2001 to September 2002. And finally, sanctions on Iran, 43% up from September 2010 to September 2011, and kept the oil at the elevated level of near $100 per barrel till the end of 2013. All these and each of these events disrupted the crude oil supply chain to the developing nation. The usual pattern was this: developed nations, mainly US, imposed the sanctions on oil producers like Iran, Afghanistan and Venezuela, etc. And developing countries like India, China, Sri Lanka and Pakistan would struggle with high oil prices and rising fiscal deficits. But this time, that's not the case. For the first time in the history, because of the global conflict, India is benefiting. So in this video, let's see how much India is benefiting and how, what is stopping, everything in detail. Last all the time, they made blanket sanction, like for example, no one should buy any oil or gas from Iran, Iraq or Venezuela. So basically from full supply, it's zero import from those countries and it's a overnight reduction of supply. Unlike that, this time they made a gradual sanction on Russia. Reason: before 2022, near 50% of the Europe's oil requirement was from Russia. So here, the sudden sanction will disrupt their own supply chain in Europe. Unlike in the other cases where it disrupts the supply of the other developing countries which they don't care. As you can see in this graph, till Jan 2023, Europe bought over 1 million barrels per day from Russia, and after Jan, they implemented the price cap of $60 per barrel, which Russia didn't accept, and Russia stopped giving oil under price cap. Anyway, that's a different story. Now coming back to India. Because of this sanction and price cap, there was less demand in the international market for the Russian Ural oil. Thus, India and China started to get the discount of around 40% cheaper oil, which all of us already know. Have a look at this graph. Here, green curve represents the price of Brent crude oil over the time, which comes from Middle East, and blue curve represents the Russian Ural crude oil. As you can see here, since the conflict from March 2022, the price difference is at least 20 to 30% lower. And because of this price difference, India started to import more and more from Russia. Here is another graph. During 2022, that conflict increases the Indian import from Russia to around over 1 million barrels of oil per day, which was 20% of the India's total oil requirement. Now, this price cap increases that 1 million barrels per day to over 2 million barrels per day, which is roughly 40% of the total India's requirement. I mean, India increased its Russian imports from 67,500 barrels per day in January 2022 to 2.1 million barrels per day by the end of April 2023. And for the first time, India imported more oil from Russia than Saudi Arabia and Iraq put together. The landing cost, including freight and insurance, of Russian Ural for India was roughly $70 in March, which is almost on an average $10 to $20 less per barrel from imports of all other countries. As we know now and clear that India's economy is highly susceptible to oil price fluctuations, as per some report that a $10 increase in oil prices can able to cause a current account deficit of 0.5% of India's GDP. If India replaced their entire crude oil import just from Russia, then we can able to reduce our current account deficit by 1.6 to 1.7% of GDP. So, can now India increase further oil imports from Russia? The honest answer is it's very difficult. I mean, due to this sanction, the trade with Russia in US dollars is banned now, and also Russia was removed from the international SWIFT payment system. Here, trading with rupee is no use since in FY 2022 from Russia, India imported only near $10 billion worth of oil. Whereas in FY 2023, that increased to over $46 billion worth of oil. In the same period, the product exports from India fell slightly to $3.43 billion worth from $3.61 billion in the previous year. This will make Russia to have way large quantities of excess rupees and end up like no way to spend them. So trading in rupee is impractical for Russia. Basically, India has to find an alternative currency to the US dollar for purchasing Russian crude oil. For now, Russia and India are trading in UAE dirhams, which helps to a certain extent as UAE dirhams is directly pegged to the US dollar. But this does not completely solve the rupee issue. UAE is also a net exporter to India, so India buying more dirhams for Russian trade will cause the rupee to depreciate against the dirhams. I hope you guys understand the issue here. Now, you may ask and question the topic that I mentioned how India is winning the oil war this time unlike the olden times. To answer that, as you know, Europe banned seaborne crude oil imports from Russia starting from Jan 2023. At that time in Jan, Russian oil in Europe was accounted for nearly 30% of total crude imports. So from Feb onwards, that 30% instantly becomes near zero. While to some extent US helped and has increased its crude oil exports to Europe by more than 70%, but still they are unable to meet all of Europe's needs. So Europe accepted, and at present Russia is rerouting their crude oil to Europe via refineries in India, China, Africa and the Middle East. Thus, India has become the transshipment hub for sending Russian Ural to Europe as refined oil. Here I am showing the full graph that includes February, March and April Europe fuel import data. Pink bar in the April 2023 is the refined fuel export from India to Europe. Refined fuel means instead of sending as bare crude oil, India refined it as a final product like petrol and diesel. Basically value addition. Since if India sends the direct crude oil from Russia means, then it's a violation of international trade law. In April 2023, India supplied roughly 365,000 barrels per day to Europe, an increase of 187% since the start of the conflict in February 2022. So basically, Russian oil wears an Indian disguise as India becomes the top fuel exporter to Europe. However, India cannot completely substitute entire Russian oil exports to Europe, which averaged around 1.1 million barrels per day before the start of the price cap, as India is limited here by its refining infrastructure. From May 2022 onwards, all the Indian oil refineries are operating at the full capacity, with overall capacity utilization exceeding 100%. In January 2023, Indian refineries capacity utilization reached 106.9%, and government oil refineries like Indian Oil Corporation reported even higher figures of 110% capacity utilization. So, India cannot increase oil exports without investing in additional capacity expansion projects. Also, India cannot stockpile so much excess crude oil due to its limited strategic petroleum reserve capacity of 5.33 million metric ton, which covers only about 9.5 days of national demand. In contrast, countries like China have significant reserves that can meet nearly 50 days of their national demand. So, the only solution for India is to rapidly refine and export more Russian oil. The idea behind the sanctions was to cripple Russia's revenue source without completely cutting off the global oil supply. Although the plan has worked to an extent, it has not been false-proof. Russia is still making the money, but not as much as before. In conclusion, this time the global conflict has taken an unexpected turn. For the first time, countries like India and China, which is used to be victims of international oil politics, are benefiting from the conflict. Both countries have taken advantage of the situations to secure cheaper crude oil from Russia, helping to alleviate the negative impacts of rising crude oil prices on their economies. India has not only increased its import of discounted Russian crude oil, but also becomes a major refined oil exporter. But it was limited due to the rupee and capacity problem. So that's all in this video. I hope you guys find it interesting. Please let me know in the comment section if you guys like this kind of global macroeconomic politics video so I can do more related studies and research. Thank you.